Okay, part two of the trace and the index, and we're going to have a look at in the thoughts of Roland Bart and some by Susan Sontag. And in particular, I want to look at little bits of Camera Cheetah by Roland Bart, a remarkable piece of writing where Bart describes the mnemonic qualities of photography, but also its inescapable relationship with death. It's an account of a search for a photograph that can summarise his mother after her death. We never see the photograph as he replaces it with a photograph of Nadir's mother. Um, Before this, Bart had written about photography, but mostly about advertisement and press photography, forms of organised communication texts, where verbal language defined them, and not like not art or science photographs, but usually photographs that had a linguistic determination. Um, but in this particular piece of writing, it's a very personal piece of writing, where the photograph takes on the role of an aid to him to discover the memories of his childhood. And there's some similarities in here to parts of the writing of Walter Benjamin, especially the Berlin childhood essays that Benjamin wrote. One of the things that one of the differences that I just want to think about quickly before going into the other parts of this is, and this is, I just want to think about different types of photographs and whether they're icons or indices. Now, if you think of something like a cyanotype or a rayogram or those type of contacts, photograms are photograms icon or indexes, or are they both? Do the shapes of the shadows become signs that stand for the objects, or is how do we think about how a photograph, what makes a photograph, what is a photograph? Is it the lens? Is it the camera? Is it the process that actually makes up what a photograph is? And one way to think of it is via separation. And that really what it is, there's a distance between the subject and its reproduction. And this is both temporal and spatial. And this space exists both at the time of production and also the viewing. So that when you make a photograph and through a camera, there's a space between the camera and the subject. But also, even if you make a cyanotype, that there is an imperceptible space between the object sitting on the paper and the paper itself, and that space is represented by the shadow that's cast and creates an image. So temporality in photographs, unlike real-time shadows and mirrors, the footprints in photograph, you think of rather a footprint instead of a shadow or a mirror. Footprints in photographs are constantly changing signs of new objects. Instead of being constantly changing signs of new objects like they are in a mirror, that they are held in stasis. They're permanent traces of unique, temporally situated events. Hopefully that's not too confusing. Anyway, so what happens is Bart is looking through a series of photographs, trying to find a picture of his mother that brings up this sense of his mother to him, that he's looking through all these different unique events to try and find the unique event that brings up his mother. And remember, in the last part I talked about how photography actually reduces uniqueness, and he can't find it until he finds a photograph of his mother as a child, before he even knew her, before he was even alive, that actually brings his mother to him in that unique way. He has no temporal relationship to that image, but there's something else that brings it out, that's beyond icon, that beyond index, that brings his mother to him. And he terms that that has been. And this is, for him, the Gnome of Photography. And I'm going right to the end of the book here, and I'm going to just read a couple of things from Bart. The Gnome of Photography is simple, banal, no depth. That has been. The photograph is an extended, loaded evidence, as if it caricatured not the figure of what it represents, it's quite the converse, but its very existence. The image, says Phenomenology, is an object as nothing. Now, in the photograph, what I posit is not only the absence of the object, it is also, by one and the same movement on equal terms, the fact that this object has existed and that it has been there where I see it. So this is the that has been of photography, that it has to have existed. That's what is the big thing that Bart draws from photography, that separates it out from other forms of reproduction. Then this is the special aspect to photography. Now, earlier in the book, he tries to define what it is about photography that really makes it different. This is where he ends up, but how does he get there? And he gets there by defining photography through two terms. One is the studium, and the studium controls the descriptive presentations of things in the world and consolidates our cultural understanding of them. Now, it's the qualities of the photograph. It's the average effect of the photograph. It's unconcerned and inconsequential to taste. One of the photographs that he references within the book is this one. A man on death row, Lewis Payne, 20 years old, April 27th, 1865, and the photographer was Alexander Gardner. Sorry, just to read that out, but that's part of the interest of it. This person went under a number of pseudonyms: Payne with a Y, Payne with an I. He was also known as Powell, Lewis Powell, and he was a co-conspirator with Wilkes Booth in the assassination of the American president, Abraham Lincoln. The story behind this image, and this comes from the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art, is that the photographer Gardner took 10 photographs of Payne. He made a full-length profile and full-face photographs of all the conspirators in what would become the normative way for police photographers later. So, and that's part of evidence. These are the people who committed one of the greatest crimes in American history. We can still see them through the photograph. This photograph is actually the full photograph, not the crop version that is in Camera Cheetah. Now, the studium of this is the subject is sitting against a gun turret, which is why the image blurs out so much on each side. But this also heightens the focus on the face. The buttons, although it's the buttons that are in the most particular focus in this image, the face still has just a beginning of disappearing from focus. There's a slight blur to the eyes. He has bow-like lips. The eyes are light with a slightly raised brow. He has slightly protrusive ears. There's a small cleft in his otherwise indistinct chin. You can see those handcuffs that have drifted out of photograph. His knees are fully out of focus. And this is the studium. This is all the information The man's a prisoner. He's sitting down against this heavy metal object, which is the turret of the gun turret of a ship of the time. But there was a second terminology, a second thing that Bart discovers in photographs, and that's the punctum, a sting, speck, cut, little hole, or an accident that pricks the spectator. It is the thing that breaks through the photograph. It is the thing that is an individual response to a photograph. It doesn't happen for every photograph, and so it's not actually incumbent within either the viewer or the photograph to find punctum. Punctum type of reveals itself, and so it's very different to the studium, which is always there, but the punctum isn't necessarily there and mightn't ever be there in any image. And for Bart, the punctum of this photograph was the eyes that are both living and dead. That this man is most obviously a man who is about to die and is now dead. And this is something that breaks through the photograph for him. That we look at a photograph of this person who seems to be living and alive and is now most obviously death, even from the title of the photograph, Man on Death Row. So you look into the eyes of a living person, that person has been dead. He's been dead for a long time now, but he's also pronounced dead by the titles of it, by the understanding of what the photograph is. So, and one of the things I would like to demonstrate about how you can get this from one photograph and not another. I'd like to show you another photograph that was taken just before this. Like Gardner took 10 photographs of pain, and this is another one, and without the handcuffs, and in this type of odd jacket. And the soldier standing by, and he's not isolated. He doesn't have that black gun turret behind him. That you really get a very different sense from the same facial appearance than you do in the other photograph. Now, I'm just going to segue into some ideas from Susan Sontag now about photography. That type of extends the Gnome of Photography that Bart was talking about. And this is moving towards the end of this second section. And after this, I'm going to go in the third section, have a look at the work of the photographer Jeff Wall and see how he responds to many of these discussions to do with photography. So Susan Sontag in On Photography says the revelatory character of photography generally goes by the polemical name of realism. For a medium so often considered to be merely realistic, one would think photographers would not have to go on as they do, exhorting each other to stick to realism. So Bart's talking about that has been, Benjamin's talking about the disappearance of aura and how photography acts as evidence. I've type of discussed how when you look at a photograph, you see more than you could than if you were standing in front of it. So much photography is about realism, and Sontag is saying, it's obviously about realism. Why are these continual exhortations to realism? Why, when in press photographs, do they have to be made in a certain way? Photographs aren't real. They have a perception of being linked to the real, but there is no true realism in a photograph. So she goes on to say, photography's commitment to realism can accommodate any style, any approach to subject matter. So you think of the documentary journalist. There's a link to the news and the event, and this has happened, and we see it, and this is true. There's think of someone work like, you know, the famous photographer Ansel Adams and his photographs of Yosemite, which actually ended up being used to turn parts of Yellowstone and turn that into a national park, because, you know, the links to the beauty of the place. Other you can think of a number. You think of the photograph that you show to your friends of the funny things that your dog is doing, or your cat's doing, or your child's doing, or your brother's doing. There's this. Doesn't matter often how a photograph is made, or even why it is made. That commitment to realism does continue through all styles of photography. But what that does for Sontag, and all that photography's program of realism implies, is the belief that reality is hidden. Just to anything in the photographic view is to show that just to photograph something, anything in the photographic view is to show that it is hidden. And let's start by pointing back to that idea of looking and forensic looking that is available to those looking at a photograph. It's not necessarily available to the photographer who originally makes the image, but it's available to people post that point who are looking at a photograph. That all these new assumptions, conclusions, and all these things are made afresh by the viewer because they can linger in their gaze and forensically look at a photograph. And so in the next part, I'm going to look at the artist Jeff Wall and how he uses both this links to realism, the program of realism, this forensic looking into, and shifts those ideas into how we make pictures rather than how we make photographs.